Hey y'all, we're back today and we're gonna do some pizzas. We're gonna put them together. So Joe had made the dough for me a little bit earlier. I have gone ahead and pushed them out so that I have my dough balls and ready to go ahead and flatten them. And then I'm going to par bake them before I put anything on them. And the reason for that is I will actually end up freezing most of this, so when they're par baked, easy to set in the freezer to not kind of droop when you put them in there. And then we will get on to putting the toppings on before we freeze. Talk to you soon. All right guys, here's the pizza dough kind of flattened out. Now these aren't big rounds because really when it comes to the evening, we're each gonna have our own pizza at the end of the night. So it's not gonna really matter to me that it's a great big large pizza. So we're gonna do actually a few smaller ones. We're going to put them on a pizza screen, par bake it, which generally takes about 2 to 5 minutes, depending on the size and the thickness. You don't wanna get these too thin, especially because thinness usually goes to the center. And that way you don't burn anything in the middle of this. So after we come back, we're gonna see what the par bakes look like, and then we'll start giving the toppings to them and throwing them in the freezer. All right, we're back. So here's what happened while you were gone. For just a minute here, is I did the par baking. So this is 2 to 5 minutes. They're still not cooked. They're gonna be floppy and hot. They're still floppy and they're gonna be great for us to put our toppings on. So what we'll do is we'll put our toppings on, then we'll freeze them in order for us to wrap them. So this is going to be whatever you want on it as for a topping. My husband's a real meat eater, so this one will have sausage, and I'm not even sure what else, but we'll get down to that in just a moment. All right guys, we're back, and we can't forget about the most important thing. We gotta straighten this out a little, is this sauce. And for me, I'm not a red sauce type of person. Joe always is. So I am taking a can of tomato sauce, and let me just verify for you guys. This is the 15-ounce can of tomato sauce. Now I do want a little bit of tomato paste, but obviously not enough to open a full can. That would be extremely sweet. So I'm just opening this up.
Wow, they're camping big.
And it's gonna amount to about 2 tablespoons. So if you use the can, you have quite a bit left over. So what I've decided to do is use the paste that comes in a tube. So I have a butter thing. We all know this. You know, this Julia Child thing just never goes away. We're gonna open butter and we're gonna put about half a stick in. It's not something you have to do. I just love the flavor that it adds to anything Italian, anything for sauces. It's just a great equalizer for me in recipes. All right, so we're gonna start off with some fresh garlic, or garlic in a jar. Joe and I have not obviously had the garden going. We are so excited to try and do the indoor garden next year. So that's about 2 tablespoons. And this is gonna seem kind of like a lot of things to put in one sauce, or pizza sauce if you will. But honestly, you kind of got to get it all in there for it to have some really great flavor. So we're gonna only do about a half a teaspoon of celery seed. Now, if you're looking at the jars are because I really hate trying to put larger spoons into jars, so I moved them all to canning jars. It just really helps me not have to fuss with the dumping something into a spoon, because I'm the type of person it'll go all over the counter. So, and I'm really upset when I end up doing not only the mess, but I can't get the spoon in the jar. So it's going to be a teaspoon of onion powder, a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of parsley, and we'll probably do 2 teaspoons of oregano. Now after it sits a little bit, as always, as I always say to you, just judge what you think tastes best. I really love seeing other people's recipes, but the most basic thing about cooking is something you enjoy. And excuse Joe, he's having a Call of Duty day, so he's being extremely loud. So anytime you start working on a recipe, it's important that the flavor that comes out is what you love the most. And if you're not loving it, try a different route. I cannot say that I have never messed up a recipe, or a recipe that I was looking at and decided to change a little bit. And that's okay with me. It's, you know, it's the way you learn. It's the way you embrace your own food. It's the way you talk about your food. When I'm really happy, it really shows. My food actually has a disaster on a bad day sometimes. So make sure that their flavors and combinations go together well, and work on it, adjust it, make it yours. It doesn't mean that everything has to be the same at all times.
Yeah, I just needed a break.
I really do love following other people's recipes and seeing what they do, but eventually I get adventurous and decide that I really want something that I think might work. Beef rib stew was one of those days. I thought, I just know that this will work because beef ribs have such an amazing flavor. So I pretty much do that to a lot of things that I do, and I encourage you to do it with yours. You know, sometimes people don't like garlic, salt, peppers. Change it to be what you need it to be, instead of trying to change it exactly to what I do. If what I do works for you, great. If it doesn't, go do something else, do something that you have fun doing. So this is what the sauce looks like. I'm gonna let it simmer. Oregano can be really bitter, so I'm gonna actually let it start coming up in heat, but I don't want it popping all over the place. One of the reasons that I wear oversized shirts and pretty much cheap shirts is because I am not a fan of having to wash out oils and things of my clothes. It gets harder and harder to do sometimes. But oregano can be bitter, and it needs some time to melt with all your other ingredients. So as it gets wet and starts to get flavor into things, it'll have the flavor but not any of the bitterness. So I'm gonna leave this here for about 10 to 15 minutes just to let it get combined together. And my way of eating pizza is actually very simple because I am kind of an oil and garlic kind of person. For when I eat pizza, the tomato's too heavy for me. So we'll get right back to putting the rest of the pizzas together and getting them prepared to freeze, and a couple for us for tonight. All right, y'all, we're back and we're getting ready to assemble our pizzas. The easiest step, of course. So I have some good old parchment paper. That's gonna set me up to put these in the freezer. Let's move these two out of the way. So remember, these are going to be frozen. So there's not a problem with undercooked because you're going to cook them again when you make them. All right, so I have his two to start here. And then we're gonna add some of the sauce. Now, as you all know, this is whatever you would like it to be. Sauce is, you know, optional, and whatever your toppings you like. Sometimes I eat a pineapple and onion. This time around I'm gonna do margarita, which is basil and tomato. And we will see that I use a avocado oil and a little bit of garlic to flavor the bottom, because the red sauce tends to cause me to have horrible issues with my stomach. It just burns, and that's pretty common with the stomach issues I have. And for tomatoes, they're very acidic. Mostly in the canned variety, tomato sauces and things like that, just because they're a little more concentrated. A regular tomato does not necessarily cause all the issues that I have with tomato sauces and tomato pastes and things. So I just alter how I do things. All right, guys, we're back to work on my version of the pizza, since I don't eat the same as Joe. So I'm gonna start out with a little avocado oil. Now this, again, preference, but you don't want to have, so this is probably about a table to a teaspoon to a tablespoon. I'm going to move it around. This kind of depends on how much you really want on it. Remember that cheese has an oil content too. So when you're adding oils to anything, you think about what's in the rest of it, so that you don't actually end up giving yourself just an oil mess. You obviously do not want your pizza to start dripping on you. Now you'll notice mine are a lot smaller for what I do for myself than Joe. I tend to eat a very little bit. So I just have a regular home teaspoon for this portion. And just gonna lay a few out. I don't want it to be incredibly garlicky. As much as I love garlic, it's not all that pleasant to chew on when you're eating a pizza. So we're gonna just mash this around a little bit. Make sure that both the garlic and the oil starts to infuse around the whole thing. All right. So for mine, I told you this was very basic. The tomatoes. Now I am a sucker for a good tomato. It's really not healthy for me to probably eat as much as I do with my stomach, but it is something that I just cannot seem to break away from. So I decided I would like a little bit of onion. I'm still a big onion fan. All right. And the last thing I'm gonna add to this is basil. Basil with the tomato. I don't know who came up with it, but it was a really good thing. So for your basil, now I rinsed these earlier just to bring them back to life a little bit. These are gigantic. You rarely see them this large. So I'm gonna just kind of place them. Now I do love basil. It's kind of like the tomato thing. The more you put on, the better, because it's gonna sink with the cheese. It's gonna flop around on the pizza, and when you cut it, it's going to break all over the place. So it is, you know, incredibly good to decide how much of what ingredient you want on it, and just go with that. Some people, this is a very small amount, but for me, like I said, once you cut into this stuff, it's a very different situation. The thing that you thought was so amazing kind of breaks apart. So just gonna add my cheese to this. Now I do have something that I forgot to grab out. So one of the things for me is an Italian seasoning. And I happen to like this one because it does have the red pepper in it, which is just a McCormick's Italian seasoning. But it does add a lot of flavor to have it mixed on top. So as it cooks down, you just kind of get all of those flavors. So we're gonna wait for Joe's stuff to get out of the oven, and then we'll add this to it. All right, guys, here's those pizzas that we just did. Just came out of the oven. Of course, I made personal pizzas because we don't need that many. So now what's gonna happen is I'm going to let the other ones freeze. And once they get frozen, I will take and wrap them with saran wrap and tin foil, put them into the oven, about 450. I'd say it takes about 15 minutes. The only thing is that you should watch, because you never know. Sometimes the edges tend to get a little bit heated, and you don't want burnt pizza. Guys, I love that you hung with me today, and we'll be back soon with another video. God bless.